Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly edition of the Human SOS Show. And we're glad to have you join us. Hope that you will let us know where you are joining from. Also, love to hear your comments and your questions as we go along. And so, Anton, you want to open up our program for the day?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Before we dive into what we're talking about, why are we talking about it? Here at the Human SOS Show, we're constantly talking about how to live in a more sustainable way, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be at home. And the point of it is that we're using more resources during the day from a human perspective, right? Like just from our body, our mind, our soul, than we should be. And a lot of times it's not even about how much we're using, it's about how little we're recovering. It's
Mm,
how little we're giving back to our body to be able to catch up to, where it needs to be and recover from all the different difficult tasks we did over the day. And the most important, hands down, none come close to it, important aspect of recovery is sleep. And that's what we're going to be discussing today, how, sleep and stress impact us or lack of sleep, and maybe some tips on what we can do to improve that sleep. So getting started, just Kevin, how's your sleep, man?
it uh, it varies. At this stage in life, there's factors that come into play, but generally, I can count on getting at least 5, 6 hours of sleep a night. Sometimes more, not often less. But I pay a price when I don't get some good sleep. How about you?
I'm a if you ask anybody around me, they'll tell you like I protect my sleep. I usually get 7 to 8 hours. I would say 28 out of 30 days in a month. And some people will say, "Oh, that's too much. I don't need that much." And I have worked in the health industry for a long time. I've worked in the health industry long enough to have people really drastically shift in their physiology over time, both in a positive way and a negative way. And what I mean by that is I've met people who are high achievers, oftentimes executives, and they're asking a lot from themselves. So they're like, you look, I'm perfect at 6 hours, I'm perfect at 5 hours. And I'm like, no, you're not. Based on a demand that's happening in your everyday life, right? You're not. The reason you feel that you are okay is because your energy levels are not plummeting, right? People are like, well, I have enough energy to get through the day. And I'm like, okay, the thing is, there's such thing as called cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and it basically, gets our body, it's our go hormone in a way, one of many.
Hmm.
And what happens is when it's chronically elevated, like many of these high achieving executives have because they're carrying a lot of stress all the time, it's always keeping their body in the go mode. And sleep is not really important to them because they think that because I'm, have plenty of energy, I don't need sleep. But the problem with that thinking and how I usually pull people out is they're unaware of other things that are caused by lack of sleep outside of just energy, right? They're not seeing all the small little symptoms that over time have gotten pretty bad. But because the contrast isn't sharp, the change was gradual, they never notice them. So we journal with them, we do a lot of things like that where we start to create awareness of what they're actually experiencing and think about to their prime years, right? When they were at their best, what they were like back then. And then all of a sudden, aha moments usually happen. Now, on the other
Hmm.
side, I've seen people not have aha moments, keep going how they're going and crash and burn out and cause adrenal fatigue and adrenal failure, whatever you want to call it, where body stops making this cortisol, right? Stops producing it or severely underproduces it. And it plays so many different functions in our body. Perfect example is our immunity, ability to heal wounds, ability to focus, so many different things that are impacted by that. And now they're coming to a point where 4, 5, 10 years down the road after we had conversation, and I still have these conversations. People reach out to me, he's like, Anton, you told me I didn't listen. What do I do now? Um, Now it's come around and body caught up. So, folks, I am just telling you, like, prioritize your sleep. Don't just judge it based on the energy levels you have throughout the day. just, 6, Kevin, just because you said 6, I'm going to say it was 6,
Yeah.
but honestly, 7 to 8 hours is what you should be shooting for. Now, the good news, the older you get, the less sleep you need. That's just how it is. But don't, like, so our kids, for example, like my kid sleeps in for like 12, 13 hours sometimes. She's a teenager, and they do need a lot more sleep. So that's fine. But I'm here to tell you to stop making excuses for your lack of sleep. Don't say I'll catch up and then never catch up, right? The cool thing about it is one last thing, you can actually catch up on sleep within a week, right? So if you had a bad night of sleep, it's cumulative. So like you can actually have a really long night of sleep, sometime in that week, and that's all right. Now, if you are short on sleep, similarly for an hour or two a day, it doesn't seem like a lot. But cumulatively over a course of a week, it's almost like you didn't sleep a full day. So think about it that way. And that way, maybe you prioritize it a little bit more.
Well, welcome, Rick and Andrea and Stephen. Glad to have you. I appreciate being here first time, Stephen, and hopefully you'll become one of our regulars. And interesting comments already. Rick comments that he's headed to get I assume, a sleep study with a sleep physiologist. And I remember, Rick, that you had shared in the past that sleep has been a challenge for you. And I think it's more of a challenge for more people than they even recognize. And one of the things about sleep is it's not just about physical rest. It's a mental and emotional rest, and I think it even has spiritual impact as we use that time as well. So maybe, Anton, you can talk a little bit about a healthy sleep cycle. What does that look like?
So one thing that, we talk about stress, and what sets our sleep patterns is our circadian rhythm, I should say. That's ultimately what does it. And it's supported by melatonin. That's why a lot of times people take melatonin at night to help them fall asleep. The problem is their body doesn't know to start making it. Melatonin is produced in our system. We don't need technically more of it if our body starts making it. That's why after long time use of melatonin, it stops working as well. People have to take higher and higher doses because they're really not solving the root cause of what's going on. So think about circadian rhythm as being set by our prehistoric behavior, right? What we did when we were still in the caves and we didn't have society, because that's really disrupted a lot of things. Like having lights disrupted our circadian rhythm. Having fluorescent lights really disrupted our circadian rhythm. You're supposed to wake up in the morning and be able to have lots of energy and go hunt, go gather, go hunt, go provide for your family, for yourself, to eat food and survive. As that day progresses, we get towards the evening, that spike in energy should go down because we no longer need it. It's time to recover, time to fall asleep, time to do it all, later it's going to do it all over the next day. Well, the problem is if you're waking up tired, symptom number one, right? There's many people who are like, it seems like I've slept for a long time, but I'm still waking up tired. There's something going on. You need to investigate. You need to figure out whether it be sleep studies, where it just be, really starting to get in tune with how your sleep is. Sleep trackers, doesn't matter. Find out what's going on, why you're getting tired. Throughout the day, if you're crashing, right? If you're having a mid-afternoon crash and all of a sudden, say at between 1 and 3 p.m., you're getting sleepy and tired. Think about that circadian rhythm. Is that supposed to happen? No, you're not supposed to be tired in the middle of the day. But if that's happening, that's another symptom, right? Same thing, time to go to bed. You're laying down and you're trying to go to sleep, and it's taking you longer than 5 minutes to fall asleep, right? People are like, what do you mean? It takes me like longer than 5 minutes every day. Trust me, I've talked to many people like that, and that's not normal, even though something's become common. That's one, I haven't said this in a while in the show. Just because something is common does not make it normal, right? So think about that and realize I'm tired after the day. I just did a lot of activity. I should be able to close my eyes, recover, fall asleep, and stay in uninterrupted sleep for the most part. Like Kevin said, some physiological things may happen. You have to get up, go to the bathroom, whatever it may be, but you should quickly fall asleep right afterwards. Now, if you're waking up and you're young and you don't have to deal with prostate, you don't have to deal with anything like that, but you're still waking up all the time, that's another symptom. Something is going on. Your body's, and we can dive real deep into what those different issues are, but I'll cover some high level. So now somebody said they're super tired at 3:30 in the afternoon, I'm assuming. Stephen, yeah. So, right, that's a red flag. Something's going on there. And not just sleep could be a factor, it could be blood sugar regulation. But ultimately, what often happens is that stress hormone is not being regulated properly. Instead of having kind of like this big peak in the morning and then a gradual calm down, we may have a low start, staying low or staying high and coming down midday, then coming back up into the night. There's many different patterns, but you can test it. There's saliva tests that you can take home, and you basically buy them online and they get shipped to your house, and you spit into 4 different tubes throughout the day, and they measure what does that diurnal cortisol pattern, which is basically your saliva, how much stress hormone is present in your saliva, and then they can tell what your pattern looks like, and then you do specific things to fix it. So let's get into some comments before I talk all day, because this is an area of passion of mine.
Interesting, Anton. I now have a smartwatch, and if I set it up, it will measure my stress levels throughout the day too. I'm not sure the science behind it, but seems to be fairly accurate. So it's pretty fascinating. Welcome, Professor Jagdish. Glad to have you with us. Let's see. Rick talks again about his sleep, and that right now he's managing it with drugs. But the problem with drugs is, as he talks about, the hangover effect, that fuzzy feeling. And so, yeah, that's an issue. And Andrea comments that she's got to have her 8 hours. And she also makes a good observation. Daylight is important to set our circadian rhythm in motion. Experiencing creation, if you will, and the design of it is also a factor in how our design works and how we're affected by it. And that's a good reason to spend time outside, especially in creation.
She mentions routine, right? Or somebody said, I think the word routine, rhythm, I guess. But yeah. Set a routine for yourself, right? Like a lot of times there's lots of things you can do to improve your sleep. And ultimately, if your sleep is not good, your stress is not being managed. That's the 90% of the issues, maybe even more, arise from that. And even people with CPAP, like Rick and many folks that I know, managing your stress will significantly help your sleep. Now, you mentioned taking drugs. What we don't talk often about is those drugs are actually causing stress on the system. They're foreign chemicals that don't belong there, and they could be stressing the body out. And there's many different sources of stress. But at the bare minimum, what I tell people to do is set a sleep routine where you wake up and go to bed at the same time as much as you can. I understand there's going to be anomalies, but say 90% of the time you're doing that. Get your body conditioned to have that normal cycle. Few things that you can do, right? Waking up with the sun, I think Andrea mentioned daylight, right, is important. Getting up in the morning and doing some light activity, maybe an exercise, maybe a walk, just even at the bare minimum, getting outside and getting 15 minutes of sunlight is really, really good for you. Whether it be good for your sleep patterns, whether it be good for your dopamine in your brain, your focus, you name it, there's so many different things. Then at night, try not to confuse your body that it's still sunlight out, right? So like I'm sitting right now in front of very bright fluorescent light that's illuminating my morning face so you guys can see me while the rest of my house is sleeping. But if I were to have this exposure at night, my body's thinking it's daylight. My body's thinking it's time to be awake. It's not going to switch from that cortisol production, the go stuff, to melatonin production, the relax and sleep stuff. So that's keeping me up. So usually about 2 hours before you go to bed, limit your white light exposure. Completely get rid of it if you can. The other problem, these things, our phones. We sit there on our phone, we're scrolling. Our mind is so engaged, rolling through all those different videos, all the different emails, whatever it may be, and often it also has white light exposure coming off of it. So, for example, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, like if I triple click my phone, you see how it turned red? That's a red light red light hue or the red light whatever, something, I forget what it's called, filter on it, and that eliminates some of that white light exposure. Still don't be on it, because you should minimize technology at all for the last hour. Maybe just read under some yellow light and things like that, but set those patterns. And at the bare minimum, do that, because there's like a million other things you could do. But if you at least do that, you'll see some improvement that gets you to buy into doing more other things down the road.
Basically, what you're talking about is not interfering with normal cycles of the day as designed for us by our Creator.
Yep.
The sunlight comes up in the morning. That's time to wake up. And then throughout the day, and as the evening wanes, the sunlight goes down slowly and it fades out. And then depending on moon stages and stuff, but the idea is that we should kind of fade out for the evening ourselves as part of our routine. And the phone thing is definitely a light issue, but more importantly, it's causing our brain to be engaged. The stuff, the knowledge that's there. By the way, welcome, Tushar. Glad to have you with us. Good to see you as always. But again, recognizing the patterns by design of creation, including us as part of that creation, and begin to tie into it, is of help. Another thing that is good in the evening time is even maybe in some ways better than reading, is maybe meditating or prayer. A time to begin to change our focus, to slow our day down, slow our mind down, and so on. And again, just remember that sleep is not just physiological. Sleep is physiological, mental, emotional, and even spiritual in nature, and all of them can factor into effects on sleep. And we need to keep it in mind, and sleep benefits all of them as well. So it's stress and loss of sleep can be a vicious cycle, because they will feed on each other. And I always talk about with family and friends that a good night's sleep makes the whole world look a whole lot better. And that's so true, because then we're refreshed and ready to go. As Professor Jagdish says, it's like a refresh button for the body, and almost like a reset button that is designed within us. And if you don't get that, there are definite implications and consequences for it.
Yeah, and just as I started the show, I just want to really drive the point home. Issues from lack of sleep don't materialize overnight, right? Like a lot of this stuff, especially if you happen to have high energy, even though you're lacking sleep, it can show up 4, 5, 8, 10 years down the road. And you've been going that way for a long time. But I'm telling you, when it comes, it's going to be real bad, real fast. Now, other things that can be impacted, right? And I am trying to scare some people. Like, I am perfectly okay with being a little bit, Debbie Downer on this, because like, I know how important it is. And I've seen the other side of this. Your testosterone, your sex hormones, all play a factor in it. Your blood sugar regulation, which has to do with your weight gain and things like that, all have a factor in it. Your motivation, your focus, all of those things. The problem is that you don't remember what good you feels like, right? So because these changes are so gradual, again, you don't know what amazing is. So it's like, oh, I'm okay, I'm fine. But if you actually were to switch off and go back in time 10 years ago and experience how you felt back then, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm not okay. I'm not doing good. I'm way worse than I was back then. We just don't remember it. So take my word for it. Take the word for every, doctor, every nutritionist, every physiologist out there that'll say it is very, very important to, balance and maintain your sleep.
Welcome, Sharon. Good to see you as always. Even if you arrived late, that's all right. We appreciate you. Maybe this analogy would help. And for those of you that are mechanical, okay, the oil in your engine, in a car engine, if you don't change it you can drive for a long time beyond what is recommended for your oil change. And you can drive and drive and drive, and it will seemingly not have negative effect. But being a mechanical person, I can guarantee you of a couple of things. One, it will shorten the life of the engine that you have if you don't change your oil on a regular basis as designed. Second of all, when it does fail, like Anton was saying, it will fail quickly and it will fail badly. And so it is real important. Maybe we can talk about our sleep being our oil change for the day. It gives our chance to reset and to relubricate all of our functions. And but just as the going too long between oil changes can be detrimental to an engine, our lack of sleep can be very detrimental to us. Welcome, Ayed. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And so if I didn't, please correct me. And Ayed makes an interesting comment, and this is not uncommon. My wife's going to get rid of me because of snoring. And snoring is a huge problem, and it seems to affect men more than women, based on my observation. I'm not sure the physiology of all that, but it is something that will, again, have some real negative effects in your relationship too. So,
no, Rick keeps giving advice of getting people to do sleep studies. That's a great advice. I think that understanding what happens at night and where it's coming from and sources is really, really important. Now, unfortunately, from what I've seen, it's a hit or miss with doctors. I've seen some doctors that do sleep studies. They take the holistic approach, and they're like, hey, you need to lower your stress. Here's some things. And some people don't want to even talk about it, right? They talk about medications. They talk about other things, and they won't mention anything to a person about their stress. If you have sleep irregularity, there may be other reasons, but I promise you, by working on your stress and lowering your stress levels, it will improve. It may not be fixed perfectly because there could be other things, but it will improve without a doubt. And you don't have to pay a doctor to tell you that. Like, you can work on your stress at all times. You don't need a specialist. You don't need anybody. You don't need me. You don't need Kevin. There's so much content about stress management. Tough part is it's hard. It requires you to change your lifestyle, and that's not easy. And I'm not here to tell you that stress management is something that you just easily do, anytime you want to. It requires significant changes and sacrifices. But the reward, just like changing that oil in your car and feeling how it drives afterwards, is really worth it, right? It's that I'm sure you've all gone there where you haven't changed your oil in your car and you just drive it for the first time afterwards, like, oh my God, this is nice. Like, I got a nice, good ride now all of a sudden, because you forgot what good feels like, right? You forgot that contrast of a perfectly oiled engine. You forgot the contrast of a perfectly oiled sleep in you.
Well, and there's even now, the technologies are amazing, and the smartwatches and Fitbit type devices will actually, you can actually monitor your sleep and indicate patterns for you. So if you do nothing else, try that out and see what kind of reports, because it's based on movements and activity and things like that. I think it looks at heart rate, but do something if you are not. I mean, again, 6 to 8 hours sleep, Anton, fair statement, depending on age and things. Anything less than 6 hours, you're high probability you're not healthy in your sleep patterns.
You're just not optimized, right? Like, I mean, you're not your best self, no matter what level of performance you're at day in and day out. If you're not getting enough of sleep like you're supposed to, you're giving up a certain degree of performance, right? Why do that? Because what a lot of times people say is, oh, well, I have to work. I got business. I got, this and that. And usually it's something to do with trying to get more out of life. And I'm like, by giving up that extra hour, remember, 1 hour in a day in a week is like not sleeping a full day. That should really create some wake up calls and be like, wow, I didn't really think about it that way, but it does work like that. It's cumulative. So you're giving up that hour of sleep to accomplish something else. But what you don't realize is your performance, especially consistently over time, drops so much that your focus is worse, your attention is worse, your performance to think and solve problems, all those things gets worse. So you're actually paying more than that 1 hour that you're, giving up on sleep. We just don't realize it because we don't quantify that gradual decline in our mental, our physical, our emotional performance. One other thing is we haven't talked about is anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression is skyrocketing. I mean, it has been since I've been paying attention to it from early 2000s. I mean, we're talking about 25% increases in decades, right? And people are taking medications, people are trying to solve it. Nobody's figured it out. We're not, as much as we've been talking about mental health, we are not reversing the course. We're getting worse and worse and worse and worse as society. There's more people struggling with mental health each year than the previous year. And sleep and stress management is at the core of that. That's really one of the biggest things. And I see so many people taking handfuls of antidepressants and anxiety medications, and then they're staying up at night watching TV till 1 o'clock in the morning, then getting up at 6:30 in the morning to go to work. And I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, well, it's the only thing that makes me feel good. I'm like, because your body is so screwed up right now that it's used to feeding from this technology, from screens, from all those kind of things. Just because it feels good in the moment to stay up a little late and watch a TV show or be on your phone doesn't mean it's serving you in the long term. So hard conversations. I know I'm kind of being a little difficult right now, but it's one of those things that if I could change the world in one way, I would get everybody to sleep 8 hours a day and a night, and the world would change overnight. Like, it would take a little bit longer, I'm just saying, but it would very quickly change.
Stephen makes a comment, and I think this goes to another aspect of it. Says, if I'm going through a lot, I found if I write my agenda down for the next day, it helps me sleep better. How we deal with our brain activity is such a big factor. And Anton talked about this in the very beginning. We are dealing with so much stuff now, and our brains are so activated all the time with exposure to data. I think we were talking about that on my Wisdom Seeker podcast, that we're processing a lot of data, and our brains are not intended to process that much data in a given time period. We're just not designed that way, but it's part of what our culture, our society is throwing at us. And when we can learn how to manage data exposure, I think that's the key thing, is being careful of data exposure. And that data can come in the form of phones, it can come in the form of TV, listening to radio, any kind of data outputs is something that we should all really consider as we deal with things. And so, again, physiological issues, certainly, and there, the snoring and those pieces are all very physiologically based, and certainly a factor, because it can be an issue, but that you cannot disconnect those things from the mental and emotional part and the spiritual part. In fact, Professor Jagdish makes a really astute comment, and that is, a day full of honesty provides the softest pillow to sleep. So you get into values, and living your values well becomes a factor. And, I still say that many of us are walking around misaligned and not congruent with who we are. Those will factor into affecting your sleep, because, I think most of us have experienced times where we are feeling very satisfied in who we are, what we're doing, and fulfilled in what we do. I almost guarantee that during those times you sleep better than other times. And it's about living our values congruently in our life and how that factors in. Your thoughts on that one, Anton?
No, I mean, it's It's so true. We're overloading our brains in so many different ways. We're overloading our bodies in so many different ways. Uh, there's two ways of looking at it, right? One, stop the overload when you can. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes, you're a single parent with 3 kids that got activities and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you're a business owner that got, deadlines and budgets. Sometimes you got a team to run, and they require a lot from you. Who knows what it is? Reduce what you can, right? Like, take a look and take a look at your life and say, okay, these pieces of information are constantly flowing in my mind and overloading me, and I can't get rid of because they're necessary. So that means that I have to match recovery for that. I have to take extra care of myself and provide moments of true deep recovery in order to, combat some of that stuff. On the other hand, a lot of the information and a lot of this like overdrive is coming from areas that are not vital to our success, that are not important. They are, pleasures, right? They're life pleasures, or they're, our phones, our social media. As you're sitting watching this on social media, I'm telling you how you shouldn't. Don't stop watching our show. No, I'm just kidding. No, but maybe you need to take a break sometimes. But the point is, like, it comes back to an analogy that me and Kevin talk about all the time. It's a bucket, right? The bucket is simulating our capacity for handling stress, our capacity for handling stuff throughout our life, right? Because a lot of times when we say stress, we think about somebody yelling in our ear. No, it's also sitting there and reading screens all the time and downloading a whole lot of content into our heads. That's all stress. And water represents stress, right? So if that bucket has some water in it, it's fine. If it's filling up a little bit, it's fine. But when that bucket starts to get full and starts to overflow, that's when we know we're going to have issues. Example, sleep issues. If you're having sleep issues, chances are that bucket's overflowing. So back to what Kevin's talking about, you can look and see what inflow of water is necessary. What inflow do I need to stop because it's a choice? It's a circumstantial thing that I don't need it in my life to be successful. And the other part of it is, how do I recover? By taking some of that water out, by dumping some of it consciously out so that bucket doesn't overflow. I maintain balance with it, right? So Kevin already mentioned prayer, meditation, ultimately grounding ourselves. What does grounding do for us? Instead of our brain always going, thinking about stuff all day, every day, just pausing, observing the environment, we're shutting that down and we're giving our brain a break. We're taking that engine, if we use the car analogy, and instead of keeping it revved up, we're letting it breathe a little bit. We're letting it cool down. We're letting it, get some maintenance and things like that. So grounding ourselves is one of the most important things. There's many other things you can do. Like I just did one last week. Again, I go to flotation tanks. Like, I do deprivation chambers where it's an hour suspended in water and a ton of Epsom salt, magnesium, things like that, in complete darkness and silence, right? Massive reset, right? Things that maybe there's no math around this, but I'm just making an example. Maybe 10 days of meditation was able to accomplish in 1 hour of flotation tank therapy, right? Like, it's like recovery on steroids, for better lack of an analogy. So think about that bucket analogy and what you can do to stop some of the inflow and get rid of some of that stress built up in that bucket from different practices.
Well, and it's interesting because timing is funny because, is just so you guys know, I do a Monday podcast called Wisdom Seeker, and I kind of lead the way on topics there. And Anton leads the way on topics for our Tuesday session. But the alignment's interesting because yesterday we revisited a practice that I suggested when I first started the podcast. And I think it's worthwhile considering here. I issued a 40-day challenge. And during those 40 days, I encourage everyone to do something at least once a day. And that is this: disconnect. Whatever that looks like for you, disconnect from stuff, things, data, whatever, for a time. And then during the time you're disconnected that you would have otherwise spent exposed to those things, then start making observation. Make observation of yourself inwardly, make observation of yourself outwardly, and what is going on around you. And then the third part is based on what you observe, what wisdom can you gain from your observation? And I encourage you to do that, because that is a way to stay in touch with what's going on, including, I think you'll begin to see things about your sleep patterns and your stress levels if you do this. And it will help you assess what's going on. Like Anton said earlier, the problem is that many of us don't know what good is, what really good is. We have become so conditioned with getting by that we have forgotten what it's like to have good energy, have good mental clarity, and so on. And so taking the effort to reset, and this little practice could be done in 5 minutes. You can make it an hour, depending on where you're at, what you need. But it's a way to begin to understand and look at ways to reset, rather than having to wait and, like Anton says, do super heavy reset through a deprivation tank visit or whatever. Maybe this, okay, another analogy, maybe this will help with our phones, our computers, okay? If we go in and do resets or turn them off regularly, then they have less buildup of, again, if you're technology savvy, part of what challenges our computers a lot of times is buildup in the cache. And if you want your computer to work well on an ongoing basis, you've got to keep the cache cleared out. Well, what we're talking about is for our body, our mind, and our spirit, resetting and clearing the cache on a regular basis. That's part of the value of sleep. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anton. People that dream, part of the reason they dream is they're working through mental and emotional things during their sleep that didn't get worked out in other ways. So it gives us a chance, even when we're sleeping, to do reset and refresh on things in our minds if we sleep well. Is that a fair statement?
For sure. I love how you're talking to people just doing this challenge. And I like the word challenge. I'm not a fan of like cold turkey stopping something or,
Right.
But sometimes doing these little challenges helps to create contrast. And when you have to manage your stress, to fix your sleep, to do whatever other things, like as I already mentioned, it requires significant lifestyle changes. If you don't know what you're fighting for, because you don't know what that good feels like, are you likely to succeed? No. And that's why I see it so often. People will try and they're seeing like, okay, I know I need to change. I know I need to do better. But they really don't, because they don't really have this reward at the end of the tunnel, because they're like, I'm fine. Or they don't believe they can really improve. When you do these 40-day challenge, 30-day challenge, whatever, it may be a significant amount of time, but not forever, right? Something that everybody's capable of doing. At the end of that, you go, wow, I feel better. This is better. This is better. I only did that for 30 to 40 days. What if I continued to do this for a year? What kind of benefit can I gain then, right? And it kind of starts to snowball in a positive way, where you start adding more and more things that are going to be helpful for you and make you feel better and better and better, right? And we talk about this many different ways, like keystone habits and things like that. Like do one thing, right, that's going to help you, and then build other things on top of it. So for example, like Kevin said, disconnect, simply disconnect it. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's just sitting there in silence. Maybe it's then moving to meditation or prayer and really, creating some solid focus into nothingness, or connection with God, where it's supposed to be nothing but you and him that are talking, right? After that, you go, okay, well, that's help. What else can I add it? Well, maybe now I'm going to add some breathing into it. I'm going to do some breathing practices that are going to really help my nervous system calm down, become more parasympathetic. Oh, wow, that worked. Maybe I can do something else. Maybe there's some magnesium supplements I can take that are going to help me to become more calm even more. Right now, you add that in, and over time, slowly, you build this really good routine. but you're not starting with all of those changes all at once. It's another thing that I haven't talked about in a long time. Create one change, you have an 85% success rate to maintain that change. The minute you go to 3, you have less than 10% chances of success of maintaining that, right? So gradually implementing a little bit at a time. Me and Kevin talk about 10% all the time. That's where that principle comes from.
One of the things that we might do, Anton, is just throw out a few fairly universal tips that people can pick one of them and try it. But understand at the end of the day, and we talk about this all the time, is you need to dig down to the roots of whatever it is that's affecting you. We talk about not polishing the leaves up and all that kind of thing. That makes nice presentation, but if the roots are rotting, the plant will die. And so really make an effort to get to the root causes. Some of you have mentioned sleep studies. Sleep studies can help you get down to the root of some physiologic issues that may be going on, that may be factoring into snoring or sleep apnea or whatever. But that is a way to begin to find the root causes of things and look at ways to overcome that. Now, I appreciate the value of equipment, CPAPs and things like that. And I've got friends that use them and been fortunate not to have to. But even learning how to reposition when you sleep can factor into those things. If you learn about the physiology of snoring and those pieces, there may be ways to just make physical adjustments in how you sleep that can improve things. But find out what those roots are. And if it's mental, emotional, find out what are those roots in that area. Are you, have you taken on too much mentally and emotionally? And as a result, it's being detrimental to your sleep and your health. And I have to say spiritually, if, part of being able to be at peace and at ease is a spiritual component. And I've been around a long time and I've watched a lot of people and they say, oh, I don't think there's anything spiritual. But yet when you observe their behaviors, whether they will admit it or not, there are components of spiritual that are there. They will attribute to other things, but the reality is it's spiritually based, and to ignore and deny those things is unhealthy. And I hope I'm not offensive to anyone, but I believe that to be very true. And I've had a lot of years of intentional observation to base that on. And there's plenty of science evidence out there to support it as well for those that are really looking for it.
I think somebody mentioned earlier, I'm trying to look back. I think it was Steven that mentioned they write down their agenda for the next day, right?
Yeah.
So for example, like Kevin already mentioned the word awareness. There's many different reasons why sleep could be inadequate, whether it be by choice, whether it be by physiology, whether it be by your mind, by your spirit. You have to figure out what's the thing that's really causing it, because the avenue to correct it can work much faster when it's specific to the problem. Now, most things that you would do for sleep would help in one way or another, right? Like whether it be meditation, whether it be stress management, whether it be grounding, prayer, blood sugar regulation, hormone, whatever, right? But if you figure out what specific thing is causing it, the amount of limited time that you have to put towards fixing it, if it's specific, will help that specific thing much more, right? So see if your problem is waking up too early, right? That's believe it or not, for many people, that's an issue. They'll wake up really early in the morning and they can't go back to sleep. Like those 1 to 3 a.m.ers that are just like, bam, they're awake and now they can't go back to sleep, right? Figure out if it's a morning problem where you're tired and even though you slept. Figure out if it's an issue going to sleep, right? And then do some research around that specific thing, because there's I'm telling you, there's 50 different reasons why you could be lacking sleep. But the reason I brought up the journaling thing, me and Kevin used to do this exercise, talk about this exercise, and we still do. We just haven't in a while. But 3-bucket analogy, right? We worry too much. Like we worry so much. And the reason I thought about this is because when we have faith, we worry less because it's not our plan, right? We're just here executing it. Somebody much better, much bigger than us got a plan for us. And when we have that, believe it or not, it takes a lot of those worries away. But if you don't have that, sit down and do this exercise at night. Create 3 categories, 3 buckets. Bucket number 1, category number 1 on your journal, in your mind, whatever, however you do it, is things that you can control, right? Things that are directly under your control, choices that really you make, and that happens. Usually it doesn't involve other people. It's usually just you. Second thing is things that you influence. Those are things that maybe actions you can take to influence others, certain actions you can take to influence outcomes, but you don't directly control them. Write those 2 things down. Then third one is things that you have no control over, right? Something that you can't do anything about. And that is, believe it or not, the bucket where most of us worry about the most. What's the weather going to be like tomorrow? You know, is the financial market going to be okay? Like there's just so many different things. And we have to, Kevin's got an example there. And we have to learn to put those things down and be able to realize that we're worrying about stuff that we can't do anything about. Now, in an influence bucket, if you've done everything you can to influence an outcome, let it go at that point, right? You've done everything I could, whether it be my kids, whether it be my job, whether it be my relationships. Now I have to let it go. Now it's up to somebody else, some other external force to carry the torch. And obviously, if it's number 1 bucket where it's things that you can control, if you haven't done something there, then go do it. Stop worrying about something. You don't want stress coming in from something that you actually can't control. Go make it happen. So doing that exercise alone will ground you a lot at night and help you to kind of sift through some of those things and improve your ability to fall asleep. Sorry, I got to plug my computer.
All right. And what I shared with you was actually on my profile. So if you would like to look at that, diagram, if you will, to reference, it's featured on my profile. And this is something that Anton and I have worked on for several years to develop the concept. And it is a very important concept for us. And, data exposure. Part of the problem with data exposure is we're inundated with things that we have absolutely no control and no influence over, but yet we're keeping it in front of us. And it pulls at us and it causes us to react and respond. Whereas if we understand the things we can control and influence, and those become what we are focused on, then we're less likely to deal with anxiety. And anxiety and stress go hand in hand. And those of you that have been around us very long know that we have a spiritual component, and we believe that the Bible offers a lot of insight into how to live well. And one of the things that's out there is the concept of dealing with anxiety. And I believe there are people smarter than I am, but there is a reference in the Bible at least 365 times about dealing with anxiety and not being anxious, one for each day. And because that is such an important factor in our health and well-being, it's not about a rule that we're trying to follow. It's about our designer, our manufacturer, giving us how often we need to change the oil, so to speak. And one of those is not living with anxiety and with fear. And so taking time to process that, first of all, by avoiding dealing with stuff that we can't do anything about. I just would be real curious if people will do that exercise, how much of what they focus on falls in the category of things they can do absolutely nothing about other than be anxious and worry. And I've been around a long time, and the older I get, the more I realize how little I can truly control and influence. And with that reality and the willingness to let go, maybe by writing things down or whatever prayer, whatever method, but let go of those things can be really remarkable. And like Professor Jagdish talked about, his reference was to honesty, but I think it is broader than that in the sense of living values. When we start living our values, I have a 99% confidence you'll sleep better.
There's many reasons for lack of sleep, many reasons for anxiety, but I think the biggest hopefully takeaway for everybody is there's a multitude of things you can do. Just pick one, as Kevin said, stick to it for a while, notice the improvement, add on as you go, build a habit. Right? Don't try to do this overnight transformation thing. It just doesn't work. The Instagram culture, it doesn't work. I saw this big push. It was 75 hard or something like that. Like, it's too much. I took a look at 75 hard. It's like 75 days of like read so many pages, do this much with exercise, do this much with diet. I'm like, that's a person that should have been building a year to get there, and you're starting like that on day one. And does it work for many people in the beginning? Sure, but usually they burn themselves out and fall off the wagon really, really hard. You're all capable of change. You're all capable of improving your situation. You're all capable of improving your sleep. Just give yourself a break, but at the same time, hold yourself accountable to some progress. Just the smallest degree of progress every single day. And when you look back 30, 40 days, a year, you're going to be like, wow, I can't even recognize how far I've come along. So, and sleep should be at the top of that list. There's many things like you can change about your diet, your exercise, your stress, but I think if somebody's not sleeping, all those other things are just not even nearly as important as fixing your sleep.
Well, and just so people know, the 40-day challenge, the reason for 40 is that is a number associated with adversity and going through trials. And that's why I chose that number. It wasn't just random, but if you can go through 40 days of adversity, challenge, trial, and overcome it, then you have accomplished something by doing so. And it's worth grabbing a hold of. The other thing, it's got to start with, first of all, the question, am I sleeping in a healthy fashion? Is my sleep healthy for what I need? Second question is, why not? Because I'm pretty confident saying that 95% or more of us will find that our sleep is truly not healthy. And accepting that and then going, okay, why is it not healthy? Start the process of moving forward to then be able to identify one thing. Don't try to, don't do a fad diet related to sleep, so to speak. Find one something that you've identified that factors in. Hopefully, the idea is you find the something that is most affecting your sleep and take steps to change that one something. Don't, like Anton said, you wake up tomorrow and start this whole new life change thing is about as effective as most crash diets. It will, and ultimately, when you do fall off the wagon, so to speak, you find yourself generally in a worse state than when you started, versus identifying that one root cause something for you and began to make a choice to deal with that one something. And again, I think the 40-day number is a good number. It's not so long that it feels like forever, but it's long enough that it will help you to develop a pattern. And in many cases, it will help you be able to see what the effect is of making the change. A lot of us want to make a change for 2 or 3 days and we don't feel better, doesn't seem better, and we go, oh, well, it didn't work. That's not the way things work, and especially in us as humans. It takes some time and a willingness to commit and be intentional about it before we see the results. That's why even medications, I'm not a real fan of medication. I know it has to be used sometimes, but if you look at most medications, in order to really know if it's going to help, usually takes many days, even weeks, to fully understand and see if it's had the desired effect. It's also why many times it's not a good idea to get on a medication and then stop taking it instantly because of implications of it. So awareness and intentionality are real key in this process. And I don't know about you, Anton, but I think that most of us, if we began to get healthy sleep, our whole world will look a lot differently.
For sure, there's just so many connections there that that will start to improve in so many different. I mean, your relationships will get better. Like stuff that you don't even think about will get better. So just get after it, improve it. Reach out to us if you need some help, if you need some advice. We're always here to help. Propose topics, and for our show that we can curate to make sure that we give you information in a group environment that you need, and we're here to help.
And by the way, we still are available if you or an organization are looking for coaching help with any of the things we talk about. Reach out. We're here, and with the notice, we can arrange to be there for you or an organization for the purpose of coaching related to stress and health and well-being, if needed. That's part of the Human SOS movement. We don't want to just talk. We're willing and ready to walk through and help those that want to bring about a change. Just reach out to myself or Anton, and we're more than happy to talk with you. We can even have a discovery call or a discovery Zoom and talk through and see if there is a fit there. And you have our word that we're not going to try to sell you anything or upsell you, we just want to know, is it something we can do to help? And if it is, then we'll talk about how that will work. If it doesn't fit, we don't want to be in that process, because if it doesn't fit, we know it's going to fail. And as much as we're altruistic in many ways, we don't want to fail. And we don't want to experience that problem of failing. But we're here. And at a minimum, we would ask that you follow #HumanSOS, become part of this movement, whether it's just being a part as an example of being humanly sustainable, or if it's getting involved in other ways in terms of helping promote the Human SOS movement, because we're running out of time and opportunity, or time anyway. There's always opportunity, time to address this before there are even worse consequences to us individually and culturally. Final thoughts, Anton?
No, I'm just always grateful for everybody joining. I mean, that's what me and Kevin always want to say to everybody. If not for you, we'd stop a long time ago. I mean, 128 episodes, 128 weeks. Going to be 3 years in a blink of an eye. And if not for you folks showing up, engaging with us, we would have been done long ago. So thank you all for your engagement. Thank you all for your comments. We appreciate you all, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Have a good one. By the way, I enjoy watching our audience talk to each other. And that's the sign of people in a movement. They don't depend just on the leadership. They work together to help each other. That's the way a movement works. And so thank you for that. Everybody have a great week. If you have a suggestion for a topic, drop it in the comments or contact Anton and I directly. And we will be back one way or another next Tuesday, 8 o'clock Eastern, and deal with a topic that hopefully be part of improving our sustainability as humans. Thanks, everyone. God bless. Have an amazing week. And hopefully we'll see you back next week.